I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now. Just for like 10 seconds.
Ooh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, just bear with me. I want you to bring all of your attention to the inside of your mouth. Just notice where your tongue is resting right now.
Maybe swallow once.
Right, exactly. If you're listening to this while you're, grabbing a coffee or a snack, take a bite or a sip and really pay attention to what happens.
It's just something we do thousands of times a day, right?
Well,
Completely on autopilot.
completely on autopilot. But the reality of what just happened in your mouth is this biomechanical masterpiece.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, to take one sip of water, your tongue had to morph its shape, sweep the liquid into this perfectly sealed little ball, and then launch it toward the back of your throat.
All while coordinating like a sequence of muscle contractions with millisecond precision.
Right. So you didn't just pour fluid straight into your lungs. You just performed this incredible acrobatic routine, and you didn't even have to think about it.
We take it totally for granted.
We really do. We never think about the wiring that makes it possible until that wiring starts to fray. And that is the mission of our deep dive today.
Which is such a vital topic, because when you really dig into the mechanics of human biology, you realize just how fragile these intricate systems can be.
Yeah, it's terrifying, honestly.
We don't realize how complex the machinery is until, a single tiny component stops working and suddenly the whole system just comes crashing down.
And the foundation for our conversation today is this genuinely riveting position paper from July 2026. It's by Dr. Lev Neimotin.
Right, the paper on feedback-guided rehabilitation.
Exactly. It's titled Feedback-Guided Rehabilitation of Hypoglossal Nerve Dysfunction.
A bit of a mouthful of a title.
Yeah, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But we are going to explore this radical new understanding of how the brain talks to the tongue. We're going to dive deep into a specific, incredibly sobering patient case.
That 13-year medical mystery case.
Yes, exactly. And then I really want to push on the boundaries of modern tech with you. Because we're going to look at why we can't just, fix this with artificial nerves yet, and what the sci-fi sounding future of bioelectronics actually requires.
What's fascinating here is that on the surface, this looks like a paper about muscle rehabilitation.
Right, like physical therapy.
Exactly. But as you read it, you realize it's actually a story about information. It's about biological engineering. And it exposes the profound, really frustrating limits of modern medicine when a tiny connector breaks down.
Between a perfectly healthy brain and perfectly capable muscles.
Right. The hardware on both ends is fine, but the wire is broken.
So let's start right there, with that connector. The paper focuses on something called the hypoglossal nerve. In medical terms, it's cranial nerve 12.
Which is a very big deal neurologically.
Yeah, I consider myself a pretty curious person, but I'll admit I didn't know much about this specific nerve before reading the text. According to Dr. Neimotin, this one nerve is essentially the absolute boss of the tongue.
That's a great way to put it.
We're talking about the main motor command center for almost all of the tongue's muscles.
And we should probably clarify what we mean by almost all, because the tongue is not just one muscle. Most people don't know this, but it is a muscular hydrostat.
Okay, like an octopus tentacle, right? Or an elephant's trunk.
Precisely. It's a boneless structure capable of incredibly complex 3D movements because it's just made of these intertwined muscle fibers.
Wow.
You have intrinsic muscles, which are entirely inside the tongue. These change its shape. They allow you to curl it, flatten it, or narrow it.
Okay, so shape-shifting.
Right. Then you have extrinsic muscles, which attach the tongue to bones like the jaw and the skull. And these move the tongue's position, pulling it forward, backward, or side to side.
Got it. And this one nerve controls all of that.
The hypoglossal nerve controls all of them with one single exception, a muscle called the palatoglossus, which gets its signals elsewhere. But for all intents and purposes, cranial nerve 12 is the master switch.
And the fact that it's a cranial nerve feels important here. Like this isn't a nerve coming out of the spinal cord in your back.
Right. Cranial nerves emerge directly from the brainstem.
Which is like the most primal part of the brain.
Exactly. The brainstem is the evolutionary oldest part of our brain. It handles the absolute life or death basics: breathing, heart rate, and swallowing.
So this nerve is like a direct, high-speed fiber optic cable from central command.
Right down into the neck and up into the tongue. It's an incredibly privileged piece of neurological real estate.
Because of how critical its functions are for survival. Eating, drinking, protecting the airway.
Exactly. So when that high-speed cable gets cut or damaged, The symptoms detailed in the text are just, well, they're devastating.
Yeah, we're talking about slurred speech to the point of being entirely misunderstood, choking, drooling, severe fatigue.
And something the paper calls oral residue.
Right. I read that and immediately pictured food just getting left behind in the cheeks after you swallow because the tongue physically couldn't sweep it away.
That's exactly what it is. If you lack the lateral movement, the ability to sweep the tongue sideways food just gets trapped in the pockets between your teeth and your cheeks.
That sounds awful.
It is. It's physically uncomfortable, it's socially isolating, and it's super dangerous if that trapped food falls backward into the throat later on when you aren't expecting it.
Man. Now, there was one detail in the text about the mechanics of this damage that I had to read like 3 times because it felt completely backwards to me.
Oh, the deviation maneuver.
Yes, it's this counterintuitive mechanical fact. The text notes that if the hypoglossal nerve on the right side of your neck is damaged and a doctor asks you to stick your tongue straight out,
It points the wrong way.
right, your tongue will actually deviate or point toward the right side, the damaged side. I was so confused by this. In my head, I assumed a paralyzed side would just sag and the strong side would pull everything toward the healthy side.
It is entirely counterintuitive until you zoom out and picture the anatomy of how the tongue actually protrudes.
Okay, walk me through it.
So the tongue doesn't pull itself forward. It is essentially pushed forward by muscles acting from behind, specifically a muscle called the genioglossus.
Okay, so the analogy that finally made this click for me was a rowboat.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Imagine a rowboat with 2 people sitting side by side rowing from the back. If they both pull their oars with equal strength, the boat shoots straight ahead.
Makes sense.
But let's say the person on the right side suddenly drops their oar. The nerve dies. They stop rowing entirely.
The person on the left side is totally healthy, so they keep rowing.
Exactly. They keep rowing as hard as they can. All that unchecked power from the left side is going to overpower the dead right side and is going to push the nose of the boat sharply over to the right.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The stronger side, the healthy side, physically overpowers the weaker side and pushes it across the midline.
So it points toward the broken side because the healthy side pushed it there.
Exactly. Clinically, this is one of the classic neurological signs a doctor looks for. They ask you to stick your tongue out, and if it points to the right, they immediately suspect right-sided hypoglossal nerve damage.
Wow.
But what Dr. Nemotin's paper points out is that the patient experience is so much larger than just failing a doctor's examination maneuver.
Right. A deviating tongue isn't just a quirky party trick.
No, it means you literally can't build the symmetrical pressure against the roof of your mouth to swallow a pill.
Or it means your speech completely breaks down halfway through a sentence because the tongue keeps sliding out of position.
Exactly. Which brings us to a massive problem with how we've traditionally treated this.
Yeah. The paper argues that for a long time, the standard approach in physical therapy has basically been like, push harder, do tongue push-ups, build strength.
Muscle weak, make muscle strong.
Right. But Dr. Nemotin is arguing for a total paradigm shift. He introduces this concept called closed-loop neurology. I want to spend some time here because this really reframed how I think about the human body.
It's a huge shift.
What exactly is a closed loop in this context?
Well, the broader context here is that for decades, the conventional view of movement in medicine was essentially a one-way street.
Brain talks to muscle.
Right. The brain decides to move, it sends a command down the nerve, the muscle contracts, end of story. The brain is the boss, the muscle is the employee.
But that's not how it actually works.
Not at all. Biological movement in the real world is a closed loop.
Meaning there's a constant conversation happening.
Exactly. The brain sends a motor command down to the muscle, yes. But instantly, the muscles, the skin, the joints, the tendons, they are all packed with sensory receptors.
Oh, so they talk back.
They instantly send information back upstream to the brain. They're saying, did we move far enough? Did we hit an obstacle? Is there too much pressure? Are we getting tired?
And then the brain adjusts.
The brain takes that sensory data, adjusts its next command in real time, and sends a new signal down. Action, sensation, adjustment. A closed loop.
So if the downward wire, the motor nerve, the hypoglossal is damaged, just trying to force more downward signals through a broken wire is a waste of time.
It's completely futile.
Instead, the paper suggests we should be hijacking the upward wires, the sensory feedback channels. And the text details all these different types of feedback the tongue uses.
It's really fascinating how many channels there are.
Yeah. I thought about trying to learn a complex sport, like, say, a golf swing, completely blindfolded and wearing earplugs. You couldn't do it.
No, you'd have no idea what you were doing.
You need to see the club, feel the grip, hear the striking sound. The tongue is doing the exact same thing.
That's a great comparison. And the rehabilitation framework here is about amplifying those sensory channels to help the brain optimize whatever weak, scattered motor signals are still making it through the damaged hypoglossal nerve.
Let's talk about how they actually do that in a clinic. For instance, the text mentions visual feedback. Now wait, staring at a mirror to watch your tongue seems incredibly unnatural.
It is weird at first.
Yeah, we don't look at our tongues when we talk. If I'm a patient who just wants to have dinner with my family without drooling, how does staring in a mirror actually help me long term? Doesn't that just make the patient more self-conscious?
It can be confronting, absolutely. But remember that rowboat analogy.
Okay.
If you're sitting in the boat, you might not realize the right side has stopped rowing until you crash into the bank. In therapy, the mirror replaces the lost internal sense of symmetry.
Oh, because the brain doesn't know it's crooked.
Right. A patient can literally see their tongue deviating to the side. Once they see it, they can consciously recruit different muscles or adjust their jaw to force the tongue back to the midline.
So it's not about maximizing force.
No, it's about using the eyes to teach the remaining healthy nerve fibers how to balance the load. Eventually, the brain learns the new motor pattern, and the patient doesn't need the mirror anymore.
Okay, that makes total sense. You're giving the brain a crutch until it learns to walk again. The text also gets heavily into tactile and pressure feedback. And I found it really interesting that they separate these two.
They are very distinct sensory pathways.
Right. Tactile is light touch, like feeling the tongue against the lips or sensing a tiny strawberry seed stuck in your teeth. But pressure is different.
Very different. Pressure is deep, heavy, functional force. It's the tongue-to-palate awareness.
The palate being the roof of the mouth.
Right. To swallow safely, the tongue has to act like a piston. It has to press firmly against the entire roof of the mouth to create a seal and then squeeze the food backward into the throat.
Like squeezing the tube of toothpaste from the bottom up.
Exactly. If you don't have that pressure awareness, you leave food behind, or worse, you let it spill backward before you're ready to swallow.
The text mentions using tools to measure this, specifically something called the IOPI, the Iowa Oral Performance Instrument. How does something like that actually work in practice?
The IOPI is a brilliant piece of instrumental feedback. It essentially consists of a small, soft, air-filled bulb connected to a digital pressure transducer.
Okay.
The speech-language pathologist places this little bulb inside the patient's mouth, right against the roof of the palate, and the patient is asked to press their tongue up against the bulb as hard as they can, or to hold a specific pressure.
And what happens? Does it like beep?
It displays a graph or a series of lights on a screen in real time.
Oh, wow.
So the patient gets immediate objective visual feedback of an invisible biological event. If they feel like they are pushing hard, but the screen shows the pressure is actually very weak, their brain gets an instant reality check.
They can literally watch the line go up as they adjust their effort.
It closes the loop artificially when the biological loop is impaired.
That is incredibly cool. You're literally turning hidden physical pressure into a video game on a screen. Another channel the paper discusses, and this one honestly blew my mind because it's so obvious once you hear it, is auditory feedback.
Using sound?
Yeah. Using speech sounds to monitor physical precision. The text mentions having a patient say sounds like la ta ta.
Speech is fundamentally audible tongue movement.
Wow. Yeah.
When you say the sound ta, the tip of your tongue is sharply tapping the alveolar ridge, which is the little bump right behind your upper front teeth. It requires extreme precision.
Okay.
If the hypoglossal nerve is failing and the tongue is weak or sluggish, ta starts to sound like a mushy da or a slushy thaw.
So the therapist isn't just listening to the patient's voice to judge them. The patient is using their own ears as a diagnostic tool.
Yes.
The sound itself is instant, real-time data telling the patient's brain exactly how precise the motor command was.
Exactly.
No.
And the most critical feedback channel of all, the one where the stakes are absolute life and death, is swallowing feedback.
Right.
This involves functional safety monitoring, sensing if the ball of food or liquid is controlled, sensing if you need to cough, sensing how much effort it took.
And the paper is very strict here. It says this specific feedback loop must be monitored by a certified speech-language pathologist. You do not try this at home by yourself.
You absolutely do not, because if this loop fails, you don't just slur a word, you aspirate.
Meaning the food goes down the wrong pipe.
Exactly. It goes down the trachea into the lungs instead of down the esophagus into the stomach. The tongue is the first line of defense for the airway.
So swallowing feedback therapy is about teaching the patient to be hyper-aware of where the food is at all times.
Controlling the volume of every sip and learning defensive postures like tucking the chin to protect the airway while the weak tongue tries to do its job.
So the overarching philosophy here is, if the motor wire is frayed, flood the system with sensory data.
Overwhelm it.
Right? Overwhelm the brain with sights, sounds, touches, and digital screens so we can figure out a workaround. But to really grasp the gravity of why this new approach is so desperately needed, we have to move out of the theoretical biology and look at what this actually looks like in a real human being.
Yeah, the clinical reality is tough.
The paper details a specific clinical case study, and honestly, reading it felt like reading a slow-moving medical thriller. Let's get into the story of what I'm calling the 13-year echo.
It's a sobering case, and it perfectly illustrates the profound limitations of traditional rehabilitation.
Let me set the stage with the timeline laid out in the text. A patient is diagnosed with cancer in their neck. They undergo intensive treatment surgery, radiation, the whole 9 yards.
Very aggressive therapy.
The treatment is brutal, but it is successful. The cancer is eradicated. 1 year passes, 5 years pass, a decade passes. The patient believes they have beaten it. They have moved on with their life.
They're clear.
Then 13 years later specifically, the paper notes that it's usually around 9 to 10 years after the treatment that the very first subtle signs begin. Severe speech and swallowing symptoms start creeping in out of nowhere.
Just out of the blue.
Slurred words, trouble chewing a steak, coughing when drinking water. I can only imagine the terror this patient must feel. Their immediate thought has to be, the tumor is back. It's growing on my nerve.
Which is the most natural, terrifying assumption. But the scans come back clean. There is no tumor.
Thank God.
Right. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, what is actually happening here is a textbook presentation of a delayed phenomenon known as late radiation-associated cranial neuropathy, which is usually coupled with radiation fibrosis syndrome.
Okay, we need to unpack that. Radiation fibrosis syndrome. What is the radiation actually doing over the course of a decade? Because I think most people assume radiation just zaps the bad cells, you get a burn like a sunburn, it heals, and you're done.
That's the perception, but the reality at the cellular level is vastly different. When you use radiation to kill cancer in the neck, it is highly effective at destroying rapidly dividing tumor cells. But radiation is fundamentally a massive trauma to the tissues.
It doesn't just vaporize the tumor.
No, it causes profound microscopic changes to the healthy surrounding tissue. It damages the DNA of normal cells, and more importantly, it kicks off a chronic, never-ending inflammatory response.
A slow burn.
An incredibly slow burn. Over years, sometimes a decade or more, those irradiated tissues undergo pathological remodeling.
Meaning they change shape.
They change structure. The body's healing mechanisms basically get stuck in the on position. The tissue starts to lay down dense, stiff, disorganized collagen. This is scar tissue or fibrosis. At the same time, you have vascular compromise.
Meaning the blood supply is affected.
Yes. The tiny microscopic blood vessels that feed the muscles and the nerves, the capillaries, they become damaged by the radiation too. They thicken, they narrow, and eventually they slowly shut down.
Wow.
So the tissue isn't just getting stiff, it's being starved of oxygen and nutrients.
So the hypoglossal nerve isn't severed by a surgeon's scalpel. It is slowly, over a decade, being encased in concrete.
That's a grim way to put it, but yes.
It's being strangled by stiff, non-pliable neck tissue and simultaneously starved of its blood supply. The nerve fibers just slowly start to suffocate and die off, years after the patient thought they were completely in the clear.
Exactly. It is progressive and currently irreversible.
And this leads to the patient's immense frustration, which Dr. Nemotin captures so well in the paper. The patient is suffering, they go to a standard clinic, and the medical system keeps offering them generic speech therapy.
Do these tongue push-ups.
Right. Stick your tongue out 10 times. Push against this spoon. To me, reading the mechanics of this, that standard care sounds exactly like trying to rev a car engine when the transmission is completely shot.
Oh, I love that analogy.
You can press the gas pedal or the brain's command all you want. The engine, the tongue muscle, might even have some life left in it. But the transmission, the nerve, is physically trapped in this stiff, fibrotic, unmoving neck.
That highlights exactly why the standard treatment fails. Pushing the gas pedal harder doesn't fix a broken transmission, it just burns out the engine.
Exactly.
In the context of this patient, generic tongue push-ups are not addressing the root cause. The underlying driver of their problem is not just muscle weakness, It is a damaged nerve existing in a deeply hostile fibrotic environment.
The neck is physically stiff.
The jaw might not open fully. The salivary glands might be damaged from the radiation, leading to dry mouth. Asking a partially suffocated nerve to fire at maximum capacity repeatedly against stiff tissues is actually causing more harm.
So how does this new feedback neurology framework actually change the game for this specific patient? If we can't reverse the radiation damage, what does Dr. Namotan suggest we do?
It shifts the entire goal of therapy. We move from strength training to what the paper calls cause-oriented functional rehabilitation.
Okay, so mapping the loop.
Right. We stop trying to make the muscle bench press more weight, and we start mapping the remaining closed loop. We accept the transmission is damaged. We want to find out exactly what signals are still getting through the scar tissue, and we want to train the brain to use those precious few signals with maximum efficiency.
The paper gives some really specific intervention details for this. For example, instead of just telling the patient to talk more, they use that mirror centering we discussed.
Right.
They have the patient gently try to hold the tongue in the midline, correcting that deviation without straining. They use gentle cheek pressure comparisons, feeling the difference between the weak side and the strong side without forcing maximal effort.
And I really want to highlight the word you just used, gentle.
Gentle.
Because the surrounding tissue is fibrotic, it is fragile, it is starved of blood. Aggressive stretching, deep tissue massage, or forcing the tongue to work against heavy resistance can actually cause micro tears and more inflammation.
Which just makes everything worse.
That inflammation causes more swelling, which further compresses the already struggling nerve. The therapy has to be extremely delicate.
They also talk about finding the short, repeatable window of clear speech before fatigue hits. This was fascinating to me. They use those la-ta-da sounds not as a grueling endurance drill, but purely as a diagnostic tool.
Exactly.
They want to find out exactly how many syllables or how many minutes the patient can speak clearly before the system starts to break down and the words get mushy.
Because that teaches the patient their current functional limit. Think about it. If you know that you can speak clearly for exactly 3 minutes before your tongue gives out and you start slurring, you can learn to pace your life.
Right, you aren't just pushing till failure.
You can take pauses in a conversation. You can manage your energy for a phone call. You are regaining control and dignity over your daily life rather than just feeling like you are constantly failing a therapy exercise.
This brings up what I genuinely think is the most crucial rule in the entire paper, and it completely flips the traditional no pain, no gain physical therapy mentality on its head. The paper states explicitly, fatigue must be treated as information, not as inconvenience.
It is a profound shift in mindset.
It is. The text gives a terrifying example. If a patient goes into a clinic, practices aggressive tongue exercises for an hour, pushes through the burn, and then later that night they choke on their dinner, or they wake up the next day with what the paper calls a wet-sounding voice,
The therapy didn't just fail.
it actively endangered them. The dose was too high.
And we need to explain what a wet voice means, because it is a red alert symptom for speech pathologists.
Right. Why is a wet voice dangerous?
Well, the tongue, as we said, protects the airway during a swallow. It pushes the food down the esophagus while other muscles pull the airway closed. If you exhaust a healthy person's bicep at the gym, their arm is sore the next day. No big deal.
Right.
But if you exhaust a patient's partially denervated hypoglossal nerve through overexercise, the tongue muscles literally cannot summon the energy to clear the throat or protect the airway later that evening. A wet or gurgly sounding voice means that saliva or liquid is pooling just above the vocal cords.
Oh, God, it's just sitting there waiting to drop into the lungs.
Exactly. It is actively threatening to spill over, and if it does, it brings mouth bacteria with it, leading to aspiration pneumonia.
Which is deadly.
In patients whose immune systems might already be compromised or who are older, aspiration pneumonia is frequently fatal. So when the paper says fatigue must be treated as data, it means that the exact moment the sound of the patient's speech degrades, or the moment swallowing feels even slightly effortful, you stop the therapy immediately.
You found the edge.
You have found the edge of the functional loop. You do not push past it.
Okay, so this feedback-guided rehabilitation is incredibly smart. It respects the biology. It's significantly safer, and it helps the patient maximize whatever function they have left without killing them. But I have to admit, as I was reading this section, I couldn't help but feel a little impatient.
Impatient with the medical progress.
Yes, because it is a brilliant workaround, but it is still just a workaround. We are teaching people how to live with a broken wire. And the paper actually validates this feeling. Dr. Nemotin asks a deeply provocative question that really resonated with me.
The nuclear plant analogy.
Yes. He basically says, look, if the machine, the tongue muscles works fine, and the power plant, the brain works perfectly, but the wire connecting them is dead.
Yeah.
Why are we doing mirror exercises? We live in the 21st century. We have reusable rockets. We have Elon Musk's Neuralink putting chips into human brains.
Bioelectronics are exploding right now.
Right. We have nanotechnology. Why can't we just plug in a new wire?
It is the absolute most natural question to ask, and it is the source of endless frustration for both patients and clinicians. Dr. Nemotin uses a fantastic analogy in the paper to validate exactly that feeling. He says it is genuinely humiliating for modern medicine to stand by and watch a patient with a fully capable mind and fully capable tongue muscles suffer and potentially choke simply because the biological wires are down. It is exactly like looking at a fully fueled operational nuclear power plant sitting idle, disconnected from a fully functional factory, simply because a storm knocked down the transmission lines.
It feels absurd, and I want to push back on this because the text mentions that the FDA is already approving nerve tech. It specifically notes that as recently as December 2025, the FDA approved Axogen's nerve repair graft.
Right, the Axogen graft.
We are literally grafting nerves right now. We have microelectrode arrays that can read brain waves. Why is fixing the hypoglossal nerve in a post-radiation neck still a bridge too far for this technology today?
Because we have to ruthlessly differentiate between what sounds good in a tech press release and how wet, messy biology actually works.
Okay.
An FDA-approved nerve graft, like the Axogen product you mentioned, is an incredible medical advancement. But we need to understand what it actually is. It is not an electronic wire. It is an acellular biological scaffold.
A cellular meaning there are no living cells in it.
Correct. It is essentially an empty, sterilized tube of human nerve tissue. The way it works is a surgeon sews this empty tube between two clean, freshly cut, healthy ends of a severed nerve, say a nerve in your finger that you accidentally cut with a kitchen knife. The hope is that the patient's own living nerve fibers will use that empty tube as a bridge and slowly grow across the gap to reconnect.
Okay, I see where this is going. In our 13-year echo patient, the radiation patient, there are no clean, freshly cut, healthy ends.
Exactly. The nerve wasn't sliced by a knife. It is trapped in dense, radiated, hypoxic scar tissue. It's starved of blood. If a surgeon goes in and drops a beautiful, expensive biological scaffold into that deeply hostile fibrotic environment, it won't heal.
The body can't use it.
The body cannot mount the regenerative response required to grow new fibers through it. It will just become encased in more scar tissue.
Fine. Biological grafts won't work because the soil is poisoned. So what about the electronics? The Neuralink approach was give me a copper cable or carbon fiber wire, run it straight from the brainstem, bypass the scar tissue, and plug it directly into the tongue muscle.
And here's where the how and the WHY get really challenging from an engineering perspective. A biological nerve is not a copper cable.
It's not.
No. A copper cable just blindly conducts electricity from point A to point B. A biological nerve is a living, breathing, self-maintaining structure. Have you ever seen a cross-section of a nerve under a microscope?
No, I imagine it just looks like a bundle of wires.
It looks a bit like a cross-section. It is made of multiple separate bundles called fascicles. Each fascicle is carrying different signals in different directions at different speeds.
Oh, wow.
Some are motor signals going down, some are sensory signals coming up. It interacts chemically with the tissue around it. It has its own blood supply.
And it moves.
Yes. This is the mechanical nightmare for bioengineers. Think about how much your neck and your tongue move. Every time you speak, swallow, turn your head, or look up at the ceiling, that nerve is stretching, gliding, and compressing.
So what happens if we take current peripheral nerve interfaces, things like cuff electrodes that wrap around a nerve like a tiny bracelet, or microelectrode arrays that look like a tiny bed of nails that pierce into it, and we puff those into a human neck?
The paper lists the hurdles, and it's a daunting reality check. First, you have the foreign body response. The human immune system is incredibly good at its job. If you put silicon, metal, or rigid plastics into the body, the immune system immediately identifies it as a foreign invader.
It attacks it.
Macrophages swarm the area. They can't destroy the metal, so they do the next best thing. They wall it off. They encapsulate the electrode in a dense layer of fibrotic scar tissue,
Which effectively insulates the electrode, meaning it can't send or receive electrical signals anymore.
Precisely. It goes deaf and mute. Then you have movement artifacts. Because the neck moves so much, a rigid electrode can easily shift slightly.
And a millimeter is a huge deal here.
If it shifts even a millimeter, it might suddenly stimulate the wrong fascicle. Instead of triggering the muscle that pushes the tongue forward, it triggers the muscle that pulls the tongue backward into the throat.
The text also talks about the mechanical mismatch.
This is the absolute killer. Human tissue is soft, wet, pliable, and stretchy. Traditional electronics are hard, dry, and rigid. When you put a rigid metal microarray into a soft, constantly moving nerve, it acts like a microscopic saw.
Huh, that sounds awful.
Every single time the patient swallows, the nerve glides, but the rigid electrode doesn't. It causes microtrauma, microscopic tears in the nerve tissue. This leads to severe inflammation, which leads to more fibrosis, which eventually destroys whatever remaining function the nerve had.
So putting rigid tech into a neck that is already heavily scarred from radiation is basically asking the body to destroy itself faster. It's adding fuel to the fire.
Unfortunately, yes.
So what is the blueprint? If we can't use copper wires and we can't use rigid silicon arrays, what does the required technology actually have to look like according to this research? How do we build an artificial nerve that the body won't reject?
The paper paints a picture of a completely new class of materials that are currently in development. We have to move away from traditional electronics entirely. We need soft, stretchable bioelectronics.
Like what materials are we talking about?
Things like conductive hydrogels. A hydrogel is a network of polymer chains that are highly absorbent. They are mostly water, so they mimic the physical properties of human tissue.
Okay, so they're soft and squishy.
Right. But by embedding specific nanomaterials, you can make them conduct electricity. So we need conductive scaffolds that are structurally flexible, that can stretch and bend 100,000 times a day without breaking or acting like a saw.
And it has to evade the immune system, right?
Yes. We need flexible substrates coated with bio-inspired molecules that essentially camouflage the device, telling the immune system, nothing to see here, I belong in this body, so they don't trigger that foreign body response.
The paper also talks about multi-channel selectivity. I assume this means the artificial nerve can't just be a dumb wire. It has to be smart enough to talk to specific parts of the tongue.
Exactly. You can't just hit the entire hypoglossal nerve with a gross shock of electricity.
Because then the whole thing just flexes at once.
Right, the entire tongue will just cramp up in a massive spasm, which is completely useless for speech or swallowing. You need an interface with dozens, perhaps hundreds of microscopic channels. It needs to be able to stimulate just the specific fascicle that controls the left side of the tip of the tongue without triggering the fibers that pull the back of the tongue down. It has to speak the complex multi-channel language of the native nerve.
Okay, so if I'm a patient reading this paper, I'm experiencing a mix of incredible hope and intense devastation.
It's a roller coaster.
The hope is that this sci-fi future of stretchable, camouflage bioelectronics is actually on the drawing board. The devastation is hearing that we can't just drop an artificial nerve into a patient's neck tomorrow morning. So what is the bridge? How do doctors and engineers get from today's reality doing mirror exercises to avoid choking to tomorrow's reality of bioelectronic implants without hurting anyone in the process?
Dr. Nemotin lays out a highly disciplined 5-stage roadmap to bridge that exact gap. It is a very deliberate path designed to protect patients, separating the genuine hope of the future from the dangerous hype of the present.
Let's explore that bridge, because it really grounds everything we've talked about so far. Stage 1 of this roadmap is essentially what we started our conversation with, feedback-guided rehab. This is happening right now, today.
Right. Using the IOPI device for pressure training, using the mirror, pacing speech to manage fatigue. It's pragmatic. We don't wait for miraculous future technology to help the patient sitting in the clinic today. We optimize the biology they still have.
Stage 2 takes us a step further, objective mapping, documenting exactly what functional signals are left.
And this stage is the crucial bridge to the engineering. Before a bioengineer can build a multi-channel device to replace a lost signal, they have to know exactly what signals are missing and what signals remain.
Right, you need a blueprint.
The clinicians have to map the exact angle of the tongue's deviation, the precise pressure deficits in kilopascals, the specific time it takes for fatigue to set in. They are creating the biological blueprint that the engineers will eventually need to program the artificial nerve.
Stage 3 is where we start dipping our toes into the technology, non-destructive stimulation. Testing surface or extraneural stimulation safely.
This means experimenting with electrical stimulation without cutting into the nerve or implanting permanent hardware. For example, can we use a wearable patch on the outside of the neck or a removable intraoral device, like a specialized retainer, to gently stimulate the tongue muscles or the sensory nerves?
Like testing the waters.
Does it help? Does it cause spasms? It's about proving the concept safely and reversibly, where you can just take the device off if something goes wrong.
Stage 4 is regenerative and antifibrotic research. And this seems absolutely critical for our 13-year echo patient who had radiation. The paper talks about studying how to fix the hostile tissue environment.
Because as we establish, you can have the most advanced soft bioelectronic nerve in the world, but if you implant it into a neck that is choked with dense scar tissue and starved of blood, it will fail.
It's just going to die in there.
So this stage is about researching ways to heal the tissue bed. This involves studying stem cell-derived products, neurotrophic growth factors that encourage nerves to heal, or new drugs called antifibrotics that can actually break down old scar tissue.
But the text emphasizes that this must be done in tightly controlled, objective, regulated trials.
Absolutely, not just injecting experimental compounds into a neck and hoping for the best.
And finally, stage 5, engineered nerve interface systems, the holy grail, finally implanting those soft, multi-channel neuroprosthetics we just talked about.
But notice the discipline of the roadmap. Stage 5 only happens after you have mapped the system perfectly, proven you can stimulate it safely from the outside, and develop the drugs to repair the hostile tissue environment.
This careful staging leads right into a massive, flashing warning light in the text. And I'm so glad the paper addressed this. It explicitly warns against what I can only describe as modern-day medical snake oil.
It's a huge problem right now.
We're talking about desperate patients dealing with terrifying, life-altering symptoms who go online and find commercial, for-profit clinics offering miracle cures. These clinics offer stem cell injections, exosomes, or amniotic fluid injections directly into the neck, claiming it will regenerate the nerve.
It is incredibly dangerous. But it is entirely understandable from the patient's psychological perspective. When the standard medical system looks at you and says, we can only offer you speech therapy for your failing nerve, and eventually you might need a feeding tube, patients are going to look for miracles.
Of course they are.
And bad actors will prey on that desperation.
But the text notes that the FDA has issued specific severe warnings about this. They state categorically that these unproven regenerative medicine therapies are not approved for neurological disorders outside of strictly regulated clinical trials. You cannot just take a flight, pay a strip mall clinic $10,000 in cash, and have them inject unregulated stem cells near a major cranial nerve.
Which brings us to the ultimate safety boundary of this entire field of research. This raises an important question. Why is the FDA so incredibly strict here? Why is Dr. Nemotin so cautious demanding this 5-stage roadmap before we implant anything?
Because of everything we talked about in the beginning, the tongue protects the airway.
Precisely. The mechanical and ethical stakes here are absolute. We are not talking about a nerve that moves a finger, where if the tech fails, you just have a twitchy hand.
Right.
If a clinic injects a poorly understood regenerative compound that causes the nerve to fire randomly, or if a bioengineer implants an experimental artificial nerve and it glitches, if it sends a rogue electrical signal to the tongue at the wrong millisecond, it could trigger a swallow reflex while the patient is actively inhaling.
They choke.
They choke immediately. Or even worse, they silently aspirate liquid into their lungs without a cough reflex, leading to a fatal pneumonia within days. Blind engineering in the hypoglossal system is literally deadly.
The margin for error is literally zero.
The connector must be mapped perfectly, the tissue environment must be respected and healed, and the closed loop of sensory and motor signals must be fully understood before we ever start plugging in artificial components.
It is a profoundly sobering reality check. But honestly, understanding the lethal stakes makes the progress that is being made seem that much more impressive. The care and discipline being taken by these researchers is exactly what is needed. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's summarize the key takeaways from Dr. Nemotin's July 2026 position paper.
It's been a journey.
It really has. We started by learning that the hypoglossal nerve, the vital biological wire that controls almost all tongue movement and protects our airway, requires us to completely rethink rehabilitation when it gets damaged. We have to shift from the old, ineffective mentality of more force and tongue push-ups to a nuanced new paradigm of more feedback.
Utilizing those closed-loop, visual, tactile, auditory, and pressure signals to optimize what the brain can still accomplish with a damaged wire.
We then look at the terrifying reality of late radiation-associated neuropathy. how cancer treatments from over a decade ago can create a fibrotic, slowly strangling environment for the nerve. For these patients, the current reality requires extreme patience, cause-oriented care that respects the fragile tissue, and treating fatigue not as a failure of willpower, but as critical, life-saving safety data.
And we can't forget the future.
Right, finally, we looked at the 5-stage roadmap to that future. While we can't just plug in a copper wire today, because of the complex, wet, moving biology of human nerves and the violent reaction of our immune systems, the blueprints for soft, stretchable, multi-channel bioelectronics are actively being drawn up.
It is a perfect synthesis of where medicine is today, managing the biology we have with deep respect for the closed loop, and where engineering is taking us tomorrow.
Which leads me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about your day. We spent this whole time talking about mapping the tongue's sensoromotor loop just to prevent choking and restore basic intelligible speech. But think about the logical ultimate conclusion of this bioelectronic research.
Oh, this is the wild part.
If scientists eventually map this loop perfectly, if they understand the exact electrical signals traveling from the brainstem down the hypoglossal nerve required to shape the tongue for every single vowel and consonant, and if they can build a synthetic, closed-loop nerve that successfully interfaces with those signals, are we essentially learning how to digitally decode the physical language of human speech and thought before a single sound is ever made out loud?
If you can intercept and perfectly interpret the motor signal before the tongue even moves, you have essentially digitized intent. It is a profound and slightly dizzying implication for the future of communication.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep asking questions, and next time you speak, swallow or just take a breath. Take a moment to appreciate the silent, closed-loop miracles happening in your own biology every single day.